All right, we are now recording. Welcome everybody to our online teach-in focused on energy efficiency and heat pumps. We've had this topic featured before on our online teach-ins, but this particular moment is especially critical because there is a public comment deadline in exactly 1 week, which you're going to hear lots about, but we felt like it was really a good moment to bring people back together on this issue. In some cases, pick up where we left off, and in other cases, learn totally new, fresh material. So welcome, and thank you all so much for joining. My name's Betta Broad.
My name's Michaela Shavacco.
And we're here in the New Yorkers for Clean Power office in Kingston. And we're fortunate to be joined by 4 expert panelists who will each present about 10 minutes tonight on heat pumps and efficiency and where we're at in this moment, policy-wise and advocacy-wise. And then we'll go through your questions and we'll field them to the presenter who makes the most sense. And so we'll get to have a dialogue that way. And just in case you haven't done one of these before, if you go to the bottom of your screen, your little Zoom screen, you'll see that there is a box that says Q&A. And so in order to ask a question, to submit a question, you just click on the Q&A and then you should be able to type in your question. So as we're going through each panelist, please provide a question, a comment, and we will do our best to answer them. Oh, I think it said unable to stream. And we're also attempting to stream on Facebook at the same time, just because a lot of people don't necessarily know how to access Zoom. And some people just happen to be on Facebook and then they'll discover this, and our goal is maximum education. So is it working?
I'll just try to.
All right, Michaela will keep working on it on our end. In the meantime, I will introduce our first panelist, Valerie Strauss. We are thrilled, Valerie, that you could join us. Valerie is the Director of Policy and Regulatory Affairs at the Association for Energy Affordability. So thank you so much for joining, Valerie. And we can see your screens up on the screens, so you could just feel free to take it away.
Okay, great. Thank you, Betta. Just so for folks who don't know, AEA, the Association for Energy Affordability, is based in the Bronx. We work in the downstate area. We also have a pretty significant office in California. And we are a weatherization service provider. We also do technical support for the weatherization program. We do workforce training on efficiency. We concentrate on multifamily buildings and affordable housing. We also work with new construction to make sure that that buildings are as efficient and sustainable and resilient as possible, including to passive house standards and incorporating renewables and heat pumps if possible. So we also are involved in some heat pump pilots with Con Edison, also with NYSERDA, and some of their campaigns on heat pumps. So we're in a lot of different areas. I personally do policy and regulatory work. I don't do any of that actual on the ground work. And I have been doing policy and regulatory work on energy issues in New York for a number of years on various technologies, but concentrating on efficiency for the past 5. So I'm going to provide a fairly quick update on this important energy efficiency proceeding that we have at the New York Public Service Commission. This proceeding will dictate well, maybe not entirely, but will provide the framework for utility energy efficiency programs that are offered to consumers through 2025. So I'm going to provide a few thoughts specifically on heat pumps, which is a technology that others will spend more time on in this webinar. Everybody hearing me okay? Yeah, get a nod.
Loud and clear.
Good. Okay, now if I can just, oh, well now Even though we practiced, it's not advancing. There we go. Okay. So first thing I'd like to say is that we have reasons to be proud in New York right now. It's true, even if many of us active on climate change issues continue to want more, and we know we have to do a final judgment until some more decisions are made and some more implementation occurs. But I do think we should stop to acknowledge that we do have reason to be proud of some recent actions. As I'm sure many, if not all of you know, New York passed the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act last week. It was a very long, hard battle, and not every desired provision stayed in the bill, but overall, I certainly consider it a win, and I hope that others do too. Emissions reductions goals, renewable energy targets, environmental justice considerations, and avenues for public input are now going to be in law. So we don't have to continually fight the same battles necessarily over and over again at the Commission. Also this spring, New York City passed far from perfect, but still groundbreaking legislation requiring buildings over 25,000 square feet to reduce their emissions from all sources fairly substantially over time. There are, of course, caveats to what was done. There are some alternative compliance mechanisms to be worked out, and there are exceptions for affordable multifamily housing, affordability for low-income tenants who would otherwise end up bearing the costs that the landlords incur to upgrade their buildings. That's being worked on, and everyone knows it needs to be fixed. New York City also, along with the building emissions reduction requirements, passed a law requiring new buildings and buildings undergoing substantial transformations of their roof to put in solar or install a green roof. And also it updated the law, a new law for energy ratings for buildings. So I'm sure a number of you have been to New York City and you go out to eat in a restaurant and you look in the window and you can see if the restaurant has A or a B or a C on their health inspection. And what they're trying to do is have the same thing for energy use in buildings. So if you're going to rent or purchase or, I don't know, just patronize the building, you can see what its energy score is. We definitely need to stay vigilant. I should mention PACE financing was also passed, property assessed clean energy financing, which allows building owners to upgrade their buildings and then pay for it through their property tax assessment. And we'll definitely need to stay vigilant during implementation of these laws, but they are now law, so it gives us something to point to when we are encouraging our policymakers to do better. So the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, at the urging of advocates, wasn't in the original bill, but now it does include the efficiency target from what we call New Energy New York, which is this big proceeding at the Public Service Commission that's going to dictate our energy efficiency programs going forward. The actual goal of 185 trillion BTUs is in the CLCPA and also in New Efficiency New York. 31 trillion BTUs need to cut off there a little bit, but 31 trillion BTUs has to be done by the utilities. And that's in addition to other energy savings goals that they've already been ordered to have happen within the next few years. So it's an additional 31 trillion BTU. The electricity sector, meaning the utilities, and NYSERDA need to ramp up their efforts to 3% annual savings, which doesn't sound like a lot when you say 3%, but it's about double what they're doing now. So it's a pretty significant increase. And we have been fighting for many years to do what's called fuel neutral, and that terminology sometimes people are not happy with it because they're scared it means fossil fuel. But what we really mean is that you shouldn't just address electricity, which is what a lot of electricity and utility programs have done in the past. But you need to look at not only natural gas, which is also utility provided fuel, but also delivered fuels like propane and oil, and to look at the whole building. And in the past, you could only participate in programs if you paid the surcharge on utility bill, and then so if you didn't get that utility service, you couldn't get assistance in being more efficient, or fuel switching, which is of course what we want to do with heat pumps, moving from a delivered fuel or natural gas to an electrification. And what we've seen in the most recent work and policies in New York is we've made some headway in getting the commission to say, yes, in fact, we need to look at all these fuels. And maybe the utilities have been asking for some more flexibility in how they can apply their budgets, which we also support. The other goal that is in there that we need to talk about, I think, tonight is the 5 trillion BTU from heat pumps. And the acronym is not correct. My capitalization is off. I apologize for the technical folks out there. 5 trillion BTU savings from heat pumps. And at least 20% of the funds are to go, the new funds, the new Efficiency New York, are earmarked for low and moderate income populations. And that's 20% of $1.6 billion through 2025. So it is a significant amount of money. Unfortunately, it's 20% is pretty close to what we do now. So not actually as great as we would like. The process for implementation is underway now. And we all know, I hope, that the aggressive transition we need from fossil fuels to address climate change means we need to continue to push the envelope here. So we need to stay on top of them on these goals and increase them. We need awareness and education, the benefits of efficiency, benefits of heat pumps, alternatives to fossil fuels for heating and cooling. So the process, which I want to talk about a little bit here, is the governor, with a lot of prodding last year in 2018, called for this new proceeding, this new attempt to jumpstart efficiency in New York. And it takes time. It's a long process, but in his last 2018 State of the State and Earth Day announcements, some of this was called for. The Public Service Commission then had a proceeding opening. They had an order in December directing the utilities to do things that I just mentioned in the previous slide. Now they need another order from the commission saying, yes, okay, utilities, this is what we're doing. The utilities have put forward a proposal jointly for how they're going to go about doing this, how they're going to go about coordinating with NYSERDA. And that's what the comments that are due next week that Betta mentioned. They're on that utility proposal. And they had a lot of constraints. They were definitely under some time constraints. And there's some sort of chicken or the egg issue of they don't want to say what they want to do until they know what they'll be able to allow cost recovery for ratepayers for. They don't want to say what NYSERDA should do versus what they should do. They want NYSERDA to say it first. So there are a lot of issues that I understand why they were hesitant to put forward a bit more. But nevertheless, I would still argue that their proposal falls short in a number of pretty significant ways. So they were ordered to have their savings, their projections from the programs that they're proposing show that they would install heat pumps to equal a 5 trillion BTU savings, and they did not. So point number one, that's not okay. We want at least that. The commission gave them default budgets, how much they could spend, targets for each utility for electricity and gas savings. And the utilities argued that they might have a hard time meeting those targets with the money provided, but they didn't ask for more money, and they didn't ask for permission to just get whatever efficiency is cost effective, meaning it costs less than another resource. So if you aren't energy efficient, you're going to have to go to the grid and buy power to fill people's needs, or you're going to have to get natural gas through those pipelines. So we'd like, and we would argue, that utilities should be pursuing all cost-effective energy efficiency. If it's worth it to do it, do it. You could probably argue that even if it's not, we should pay more for it to make that transition. But at the very least, if it's cost-effective, and if you look at carbon emissions and you price it right, I think most of it is cost-effective. The heat pump provisions also are kind of messy. and I'm sure other people on this webinar will talk about that some more. They're not real clear. They're in flux. There's not enough money. We need innovative financing, and just more money, and better proposals. So we are pleased that they've done things like Con Edison has made it very clear they want to operate their gas and electric savings portfolios together as one, so that they don't have to nickel and dime. They can move money around if they see that something's working really well and saving a lot of gas. Great, go for it. That's good. However, we really do think that they need to meet each target as well. So meet your gas savings target, meet your electric savings target, meet your heat pump target. If you need to do it as one portfolio and move money around, that's fine, but at least meet those targets and then go above. You don't want to not meet your targets. So that's another really important piece that we think they should continue to pursue, all of the utilities, not just Con Edison. I want to say a couple more words. It's a little bit in the weeds on the cost-effective piece. And I don't know if people were on the webinar when the other speaker mentioned the benefit cost analysis. The way utilities justify spending money on their programs is by doing a benefit cost analysis, BCA, and there's a whole handbook about how they do it. There's another technical resource that comes into play that they use that feeds into the BCA called the Technical Resource Manual, TRM, which calculates how much savings you get from a measure or something you're doing in a building. And I don't want to get into the details of that now, and I'm not the technical expert, but there are a lot of serious problems with the TRM and the BCA in New York that need to be fixed for us to really tackle climate change in the proper way and the best way, and the way we would need to do so. And the TRM is not, they had some issues with heat pumps. So we saw a lot of back and forth on savings calculations from heat pumps, and that's partly because there was a problem with the TRM, and which is, as it's structured now, not very good at looking at savings when you do fuel switching. Also, when you do combinations of measures, if you're doing a whole building approach and you're doing insulation and air duct sealing, and you're switching your gas or oil for a heat pump, looking at synergies and the combinations, it's not very good at that. And finally, in the benefit cost analysis in New York right now, we don't include what we call non-energy benefits. So anything that has to do with safety, health, comfort, affordability, that's just not in there. And there is carbon. Carbon is in there. Methane is not. So that's another problem that we have with the BCA. So we need to fix that. It's a little bit in the weeds, but definitely needs to fix that. So the comments are due July 1st. Reply comments July 15th. We're expecting the PSC order in the fall. And they have, after the order, the utilities will have to file implementation plan. We, as advocates, are also going to be commenting on and requesting that the Commission ensure that there's stakeholder participation in the implementation plans. The way the order from December is written now, the PSC take our comments from July, tell the utilities, okay, here's what you need to do, 60 days, file your implementation plans, and do the programs you put in your plans without any further input from any of us. And given what they filed so far does not have a lot of detail, that's insufficient. We need to really be able to watch what they're doing. So that's another really important comment. Cost effectiveness, meet your target, all cost effective energy efficiency, and continued stakeholder input. Okay, so the other piece that's really important to the work that I do, and I know a lot of you as well, is I think this is true for many of us, that providing support to low-income households and environmental justice or climate frontline communities is really a priority. And if it isn't your priority, I think it should be. Uh, so, uh, and the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act called for at least 35%, the final one, at least 35% of overall benefits, whatever that means, to go to disadvantaged communities, to be defined. New Efficiency New York requires at least 20% of funds to go to low and moderate income households. And those sound like okay numbers, but it's actually pretty much just what we're doing now. And if you talk about low and moderate income households in New York, that's closer to 40% of the population. So we'd like to see this be the bare minimum. We'd like to see it ramp up. It's a floor, and we'd like to see much more money go to those populations. Particularly to multifamily buildings, which is the primary low-income housing type, especially downstate and in urban areas. Heat pumps in particular should also be available to low and moderate income populations and should be installed in affordable multifamily buildings when technically feasible. We don't want to worsen a clean energy divide where only the wealthier communities and wealthier households have access to solar and heat pumps. We want everyone to have that. But I will say that affordability is still really important, and it's something that I think people think about whether or not a heat pump is affordable, meaning can I come with the money to put one in? Are the incentives good enough to put one in? Do we have some financing or a third-party owner? But in fact, it gets a little more complicated than that, and so I mentioned two reasons why it might be more complicated for low-income households. One is in the larger multifamily buildings, particularly downstate, many, if not most, buildings have their heat provided by the landlord. It's a central system, and it's included in the rent. So the tenants are not paying directly for their heat. If you go to a heat pump situation and you change the metering so that the heat pump is now on the tenant's electric bill, that adversely impacts affordability for those low-income tenants. And so you need to be aware of that and address it. The other issue to think about is we have a home energy assistance program that provides bill assistance for heating fuel to many low-income households in New York. And if their heating goes to electric heating, they no longer get that assistance, bill assistance. So it becomes a problem, and you could actually adversely impact affordability. So we just need to be aware of that and figure out ways of handling it. There is an interagency work group that the governor called for on low-income energy issues, and we believe that that would be a very good place for the agencies that administer, like NYSERDA and the heat program, the weatherization program, for all of these agencies, the housing agency, the energy agencies, to get together and try to tackle some of these issues. So finally, efficiency in heat pumps. I know we're going to have presenters who will talk more about heat pumps, and I just want to sort of remind people or tee up the issue that heat pumps are considered efficiency. They do reduce the use of fossil fuel, they can improve indoor air quality, and they can both heat and cool. But in our mind, we really need to install heat pumps alongside other efficiency measures in the building so that you right size your heat pump. You don't put one in that's too big, you actually do the efficiency you need first or alongside, and they improve operation, and as I said, they help affordability. So that's all I've got.
That was great, Valerie. Thank you so much. That was a perfect overview. We all learned a lot. We've already got a bunch of questions in the queue, which we will get to at the end. So keep your questions coming, everybody. And I will now ask Bob Howarth to share his screen. Since he is our next presenter, we're going to zoom out a little bit. I mean, we're still zoomed in, but we're going to zoom out in the sense that we're going from this more sort of in the weeds proceeding, what's happening now with the Public Service Commission and the utilities here in New York State, And Bob, who is a distinguished professor of ecology and environmental biology at Cornell University. He's going to be joining us to talk about really natural gas and methane and how that is exacerbating the climate crisis and why we need heat pumps now. Valerie touched on how heat pumps are a really critical part of the energy efficiency proceeding. And it's great that there is, for the first time ever, a mandate for heat pumps. Our campaign, Renewable Heat Now, we are really focused on heat pumps, but we also recognize how important it is to have energy efficiency, and heat pumps go hand in hand. So we're excited about Bob sharing some of his research into the role of natural gas. And I guess I'll just pass it off to Bob. And I think Bob will probably, touch on our climate goals, as Valerie did, the 40% greenhouse gas reduction by 2030, 85% by 2050. There's no way we're going to get there if we don't stop converting to gas and sticking with fossil fuels. We really need heat pumps. So Bob, please tell us why. Take it away.
Absolutely. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you perfectly.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. I'm very pleased to be part of this presentation tonight. I was asked to go into a little bit of the background on climate and lead us up to where heat pumps play in. Just a little bit of background. I'm a system scientist. I've worked on climate change for 35 to 40 years. I've been working hard on methane as a contributor to global change and how shale gas contributes to that for the last decade. And out of that, in my own personal life, I decided I needed to move to heat pumps some time ago. So 9 years ago, we converted our domestic hot water to an air-sourced heat pump. And 5 years ago, we converted our oil heating over to a ground source heat pump. I have a 1890s farmhouse in central New York, and it works just great. Valerie said, as New Yorkers, we have reasons to be proud, and I agree with that. We should be proud that we banned high-volume hydraulic fracking from the state, and we should be very proud of the Climate Leadership Community Protection Act. Those are great steps forward. So the climate, the United Nations came together, all of the nations of the world, just back in December 2015 and said, we really need to keep the planet well below 2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial baseline, or else we're in a lot of trouble. And part of that, we need to reduce methane reductions. We cannot reach that goal if we don't reduce methane, and I'll show you that in a minute. The reason, though, that we want to keep the planet well below 2 degrees Celsius from the pre-industrial baseline, we've already warmed the planet close to about 1 degree Celsius, and we're seeing a lot of problems with climate change already. Incredible heat spells in India at the moment, incredible weather in the United States. But the real concern is that it can get dramatically worse than what we're seeing so far as we hit tipping points. And this is from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change a few years ago, 12 years ago, but it's their best statement on it. And what you're seeing here is a series of possible fundamental changes in the climate system which could occur as we warm the planet. And we don't know if and when these will occur. White means we're probably okay. Yellow means there's risk. Red means there's high risk. If you look across from left to right, you'll see that we have high risk of losing the Arctic summer sea ice. Well, we're already losing that. Greenland ice sheet, we're losing it. And actually, if you go all the way to the right, we are fundamentally changing ocean circulation in a way that scientific community didn't even think was possible with the limited climate change we've seen so far as of 12 years ago. So things are bad. We really do need to address climate change, and we don't have much time. We have a decade. That's what we have, really. Why is methane important to this? This is a great paper published by Drew Shindell and others 7 years ago now. And what you're looking at is the rate of warming of the planet from 1900 up to 2011 compared to that pre-industrial baseline. Here's the 1.5 degree threshold that we really don't want to cross, the 2 degree threshold we want to stay well below. And here are some projections. this green line. That will happen if we do nothing to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. We're going to hit dangerous temperatures in about 2035 or so, and very dangerous temperatures well before 2050. This scenario is what would happen if we started to have reduced carbon dioxide emissions back in 2011 or 12, not worried about other emissions, but just carbon dioxide, and it doesn't really affect the rate of warming for 30 to 35 years. The planet would still warm and we'd still blow through these thresholds. We, of course, haven't reduced our carbon dioxide emissions, but had we done so, it wouldn't have been enough. These bottom two scenarios are what happens if you reduce methane emissions, either with carbon dioxide or not with carbon dioxide. And the point is that the climate system responds much, much faster to reductions or increases in methane than it does to carbon dioxide. And if we want to protect the planet, we must reduce methane emissions, and we must do so now. So, unfortunately, we're not doing that. This is what methane looks like. The global atmospheric concentration was rising in the 20th century. It was actually stable for the first decade of this century. Great news. But since about 2007 or so, it's been rising again and rising pretty rapidly, and that's very, very worrisome. About a quarter of the global warming that we've experienced over the last decade is due to this increase in methane. This is a non-trivial issue. Where's that methane coming from? Well, there's a lot of scientific debate, although it's starting to come to a consensus. I'm just going to very quickly run you through a little bit of detail, not too much. But this paper came out in Science just over 3 years ago, and it said the increase in methane was probably due to cows and other biological sources. The authors themselves said this is really surprising because we've had this incredible boom in unconventional gas production in North America, but that's what they said, and they had reasons to think that. You've probably heard this. This has influenced the press a lot. A lot of people go, the methane problem is a cow problem. If you've heard that, it's at least in part because of this and a few other papers. Papers are pretty clearly wrong, and we know that at this point. Week before last, I was at an international conference on non-CO2 greenhouse gas emissions in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, and there's a pretty strong consensus now that no, it's really not cows. Part of the reason we know it's not cows is we look at satellite data, and this was published in 2014. You can measure methane from space, and you can see what's changing over time. And we're looking here from 2003 up to 2012. This satellite went out of commission in 2012, so we have no data since then. But we're looking at the northern latitudes here, and these redder colors means that there's been a big increase in methane emissions in the northern temperate regions over that period of time. The authors here concluded that probably shale gas development in the United States was the major reason for that, and I agree with that. Another satellite paper published just 2 years after that, different satellite, different approach, reached a similar conclusion. They said roughly half, give or take a little bit, of the methane increase over the last decade is coming from the United States. And again, this is methane that's contributed to a quarter of all the global warming we've seen over the last decade. What's happened over the last decade? Well, the obvious thing in North America, if you look for something that's fundamentally changed, is the shale gas revolution, starting in 2005, 6, 7. And shale gas, of course, is just methane that is still trapped in the shale formations, and it's released by high-volume hydraulic fracturing and comes to the surface. It didn't seep to these conventional reservoirs over geological time, which is what we used to rely on. And over time, you can see the increase in shale gas development in the United States. Our conventional gas production's gone down. Shale gas production has gone up. Currently, about 2/3 of all natural gas production in the United States is coming from shale. And shale gas is totally a North American phenomenon, largely in the United States. No other country outside of North America is really producing shale gas, but we've had a huge change here. And so that would be a logical place to look at the source of increased methane. I'm not going to walk you through the weeds of this table. This is from the presentation I gave 2 weeks ago in Amsterdam, and I also have a paper which I hope will be published soon in the peer-reviewed literature, probably before the summer is out. Let me just say that I and others reinterpreted some of the assumptions behind that paper from 2 years ago, saying that cows were so important. and they fundamentally missed some key facts. The methane that comes from shale is not quite like conventional gas, and when you trace it in the atmosphere, there are ways to distinguish it. And when you do distinguish it, my conclusion is that 33 to 42% of all of the increase in global methane emissions from all sources globally since 2007 are from shale gas. Fossil fuels are the major contributor to the increase, not cows, and it's shale gas in the United States. Wrong way. So if you put that in a global context, this is just a global methane budget. Sources of methane from 1995. We had natural sources and we had human sources, and we've updated those for what's going on in this decade. They've gone up substantially from human sources. The natural sources have not changed, and the major increase is natural gas and oil sources, principally from shale gas. Some increase in animal agriculture, but it's dwarfed by what we're doing with fossil fuels. As a brief aside, of course, you've heard that perhaps natural gas is a bridge fuel that we use to get rid of coal before we completely convert to a renewable energy economy. It's an outdated idea, but it was based on the fact that to get the same amount of energy, you reduce less carbon dioxide when you use natural gas compared to coal or diesel oil. And of course, the problem with that is that when you use natural gas is methane mostly, and it's impossible to develop natural gas without releasing some of that methane to the atmosphere. This is from a paper I published 5 years ago, but it shows here for coal, diesel oil, and natural gas, what the carbon dioxide emissions are here in this yellow-orange color, and the red color, what the methane emissions are converted into an equivalent framework so you can see them. You can see that because of methane emissions, natural gas is actually a worse fuel for the climate than coal, quite aside from the fact that we need to reduce those methane emissions if we're to reach that COP21 target because of the time sensitivity. So let me put it in a New York perspective. These are the most recent data available from the federal government on our energy consumption in New York State. This line here is our natural gas. It is by far the major source of energy we consume in New York. It's 37% of our total energy use and almost half of the total fossil fuel energy use in New York. And when we look at the CCPA, the new legislation, which passed a week or so ago, it's mandated a way to look at methane emissions, which I strongly support. And when you use that methodology to look at the methane emissions, I estimate that natural gas is making up almost 2/3 of the total energy-related greenhouse gas emissions from New York State. So I'll put that in this plot here. People can study it later if you like. I won't spend too much time on it. But what I'm comparing is the consumption of fuel from natural gas, coal, and petroleum, and the greenhouse gas emissions, including methane, from natural gas, coal, and petroleum in 1990, which is the baseline for the new legislation that's been passed by the Senate and Assembly, and in 2017. And you can see natural gas consumption's gone up a lot, coal's gone down, oil's gone down some, we're more efficient in our driving, et cetera, that's great. Our total energy use is down, but natural gas is up a lot. When you look at the greenhouse gas emissions, those from natural gas are up significantly. So although our overall greenhouse gas emissions are somewhat lower than from 1990, they're about 8% lower, it's nowhere near enough, and we really need to pay attention to the natural gas. So the new act mandates a 40% reduction from the 1990 emissions by 2030, 10 and a half years from now. We need to take that down to 60 million tons. That's relative to the 90 tons right now. So we need to cut these sources by 30 tons in 10 and a half years. And we're not going to do that unless we really pay attention to natural gas. Where's natural gas used in the state of New York? Mostly for heating. It's about 80% for heating and commercial heat use. So we really need to pay attention to that. And heat pumps play a big role. Shale gas makes no sense. We need to move forward. We know that. I just want to mention that Mark Jacobson and others, and I'm the second author of this paper, back in 2013 published a blueprint for how the state of New York could move to a fossil fuel-free economy in a brief period of time, certainly well within the target set by this new legislation. And a key part of our paper was the need for heat pumps to reduce that use of natural gas and the emissions that are associated with it. One other point, I and my colleague Bongyi Hong published a technical paper, a life cycle assessment on the greenhouse gas emissions from heat pumps used to produce domestic hot water. This came out 3 years ago. And the summary for that, bear with me here, we're looking at the emissions in terms of grams carbon dioxide equivalents per megajoule of energy going into heating our hot water. And we're comparing the conventional domestic hot water heaters, which is in most homes in the state of New York, rather large footprint. If we instead use a heat pump, even if the electricity for that comes from coal or from natural gas, it has lower emissions. And of course, what we want to do is have heat pumps and use renewable electricity for those. But the point I want to emphasize is we do not need to wait to have a 100% renewable grid in order to push ahead for heat pumps. It's true of domestic hot water, but it's true of domestic space heating as well. Because of the incredibly efficiencies of these heat pumps, the best thing we can possibly do to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions is to move forward with the heat pumps even before we do what we really want to do with the grid. It's okay. It reduces emissions. So my conclusions, methane's an incredibly powerful greenhouse gas. It's 100 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. If we're going to meet the COP21 targets and keep the planet safe from tipping points, we need to reduce methane emissions. We're not reducing methane emissions. They're going up. And shale gas in the United States is the primary driver of that. Although we've banned fracking in New York, we're using more and more natural gas in New York, and it's all fracked shale gas. It's largely coming from Pennsylvania, all from the Marcellus and Utica shales. So we need to move away from all fossil fuels as quickly as we possibly can, but particularly it's important to get rid of natural gas, shale gas, because of these methane emissions. Heating is the biggest use of shale gas in New York State, and moving to heat pumps is absolutely essential to meet the climate targets. So thank you for the opportunity to bring this into tonight's discussion.
Thank you so much, Bob. We really appreciate all of your terrific research and commitment for many years. During the campaign to ban fracking, you were an invaluable resource. And as you mentioned, we were successful in that fight. But unfortunately, we still gotta keep on.
We've got to do more.
Yeah, we gotta do more because, as you pointed out, we're seeing a real increase in the use of natural gas in New York, despite the fracking ban, to the detriment of our neighbors and our own health and the climate. So thank you so much. And I should mention also that we can share the slides of our panelists when we send around a recording. There's a lot of great information in both Valerie and Bob's slides, and I'm sure also in Jens and Jessica's. So we'll be sure to share those with you all. So without further ado, we will introduce our third speaker, Jens Ponikau. Jens is with Buffalo Geothermal. And he's also very active with the New York Geothermal Energy Organization, New York Geo, that organizes a really awesome conference every year that many of us go to. And New York Geo is also a member of our campaign, Renewable Heat Now. I saw Jens give a version of this presentation at New York Geo this year. Really blew me away. So I'm delighted that you could join us, Jens, and share your knowledge with everybody else. So please.
Wonderful. Can everybody see my slides?
Nope, we just see you.
Okay.
So
I actually shared them, and I see.
Try again if you just go to that middle share screen tab.
Yeah, I'm showing it sharing, but I see somebody else's picture there.
We just see you.
So did you switch over to my presentation?
It should be.
Okay, we're trying it again.
There you go. Okay.
Hey, success. Very good. Let's jump right into.
Terrific.
Well, Geo Systems bring significant value to the ratepayer. And the first time this year, the Public Service Commission has actually seen that, and they have actually come up with a bonus for the first time for utilities to say, hey, if you are making the system and the grid more efficient, we're going to give you more money, more than your average 9% of profit, which you can actually keep for your investors and for your stockholders. And they wanted to do certain monetary figures on it, and there's a point system associated with it. So for example, they get money to avoid carbon dioxide emissions, or for systems which have no side emissions. For example, if you make the grid more efficient, or if you utilize it better, meaning it avoids, you use energy in the off-peak time. If you use behind the meter energy resources like a solar roof, a so-called distributed energy resource, so we don't have to build the power lines anymore, can reduce them in the transformer stations. The biggest factor of actually driving costs in New York State when it comes to the electrical grid is this dramatic summer peak shaving. Believe it or not, we built a grid for only 1 second in the year, which is actually we can even higher than that. Meaning by law, we have to cover the peak plus 17% in addition to that in case one of the major power plants, one of the nuclear power plants, etc., is going to fail, or any kind of connection line. And intensity, and certainly the efficiency, how we utilize this better. If we have better efficiency in the system or more efficient energy consumption, all that is where the utilities get points for every single item there. And the point is that Geo Systems, you're shooting all the birds with one stone here, or with one cannon, because they hit them in all the points. That's how much value they bring, not only to the utilities, but where the Public Service Commission sees value. This is our peak, and you can see it's slowly creeping up there to relatively, 34 gigawatts. It was a little lower last year, but it's creeping up there again. We just had some colder summers as a peak, not overall. And down here, this is the average load. This is much less. So believe it or not, we have about a 52% grid utilization versus capacity, which is sitting there. And every percentage point we use less costs the ratepayer about $200 million per year. So this is an enormous amount of waste when you build something and you don't use it for the rest of the time. So there is a huge amount of value there, and it's actually, for example, what we call the peak load shaving. There were some studies done. This was, for example, done by a private cooperative in New Mexico, which, believe it or not, has pretty much the same climate zone and utilization and load than New York City has. And it is extremely driven by a good amount of air conditioning related power consumptions. So in that study, they combined 42 homes there, and they shaved a significant amount of the total load off that one just by implementing Geo Systems. So what they did is they put in systems, they measured the consumption before at a baseline, and then they converted 32 houses to ground source heat pumps. And they managed to shave the load by 40%, which is an enormous amount of money saving for the utilities. how much is that in New York? And they gave us a little hint there. There was an internal study done. This, for example, is the ref order. And in there, they actually had a little study done internally. And they say, wait a minute, if we increase the responsiveness of the demand, so if we shave, for example, 100 hours of the peak we have in the summertime, we can actually save the ratepayer by avoiding the capacity which sits at idle all the time and needs to be maintained between 1.2 and 1.7 billion a year. That's an enormous amount of money. So if you look at this, again, the demand peaked about 33 gigawatts now in 3 out of 8 years. So cutting that back to about 28 gigawatts would eliminate those top 100 hours. And so we're shooting for and say, how many geosystems would we actually need if we want to reduce this? Because keep in mind, geosystems work about 3 to 4 times as efficient as a conventional air conditioner out there, because they discharge the heat to very cold ground and not to the hot air, specifically on the hottest day of the year. So again, we would save about 1.5 billion. And if you look at this over the next 20 years, that's about 30 billion. It's relatively straightforward math. And what we see in the online monitoring and the studies we've done and the NYSERDA has done, a modern ground source heat pump system would shave about 1.75 kilowatts, almost 2 kilowatts off the peak per household. And this is, this number is pretty matching. PSEC Long Island calculates their rebate system, and they acknowledge that they're shaving about 2 kilowatts off there. So if you do that, you avoid power plants, you avoid transmission lines, you avoid transformer stations, and you avoid the fuel to that, which is extremely expensive during that time. So we actually, if you run the numbers, we need about 2 million geosystems for that. It's pretty straightforward. And over the next 20 years, those geosystems would avoid about $15,000 each in cost to the grid, which we already have. That's an enormous amount of money, just by being so utterly efficient when energy is most valuable. Again, this private co-op has actually immediately switched over to heat pumps. They're giving actually a 3,200 ton rebate, and they are giving essentially a total rebate of about an average of $12,800 per install, because they realize they save so much money in the long run. And this is what that number matches pretty much the $13,000 to $15,000 what we came up with for the New York State grid. It depends a little bit what territory of utilities you're in, and obviously the power is the most valuable one down in the New York City Con Edison territory. So they concluded, and that was the utility themselves, that this is an unprecedented opportunity to sync up them, the electricity industry, with something better than everything we've ever seen. Forget about tax money for us, forget anything else. Let's just put in geosystems, which are extremely efficient in the summertime, not only in the wintertime. So there is more to the story, because there's some value in there of also using the grid better in the wintertime. And it's I don't want it to become too technical, but the winter time or at night is specifically when the grid sits more at idle. And what happens is that the grid costs are spread out among kilowatt hours. It's volumetric. And actually what that results in, that the people who utilize the grid more and better get penalized at the current rate structure. In other words, for example, if you're buying an electric car and you charge it at night, you get penalized currently Excuse me, and that is not very good. They need to change the rate in a certain way to reward people for using more electricity, to use more clean electricity. In other words, if we're implementing heat pumps, that heat pump will use more electricity. But because more electricity is used, it will reduce the price for every ratepayer significantly. Because now the cost of the grid, which is essentially a fixed cost, gets spread out over more kilowatt hours. So the kilowatt hour cost goes down. In other words, if you're putting in a heat pump, your neighbor, Mrs. Smith, is benefiting from it by enjoying long-term lower electricity costs. And that money should be utilized in order to help people putting more heat pumps in. How much is that? Well, NYSERDA did a study and they came up with about $1,000 in the Con Edison territory, and about on a lower level, about $500 to $600 in National Grid territory. So there is a significant changing there. And in terms of what the bill will be changing, a lot of that will be changing in terms of what they call the inverse cost shift. The fact that those heat pumps are operating and using more electricity will actually lower the cost for other ratepayers, and that money should be utilized. So in other words, we're looking at between $400 and $800 a year in the Con Edison territory, again, over 20 years. That's currently about $16,000 for every Geo system we put in, which they see as a benefit to their grid. So there is, again, an enormous amount of value there. And how much is that? Well, again, depends on how much and what territory we're looking at. This is National Grid. They can save about $11 billion over the next 20 years if they go ahead and start really putting in a lot of heat pumps that way. Because so the ratepayer can save a significant amount of money. And again, New York City is about 3 times as much. So the benefit could there be about 3 times as high. But a lot of people always look at the electrical benefits from heat pumps, and they also do not account for what they actually avoid. And that is they avoid the cost, enormous cost of putting gas network in. A lot of times when we talk to or races, we're talking about electricity now, you're talking about heating, that's gas. No, heating is not gas. Heating in the future should be heat pumps. And they bring actually benefits to the gas infrastructure because they avoid enormous costs there, for example, expansion costs. There's very little data there, but there is actually published data from the Public Service Commission here. When in Plattsburgh, New York, there was the gas distribution network expanded. And they had about $8 million in total costs, and they reached about 443 new customers. Well, it's not rocket science to come up and say this was $18,500 per customer as a direct cost to the utility. Now, the customer was shifting there a little bit because they then, in order to finance it, they charged every customer $850 more per year. But the customer also, and on top of that, had to have $8,700 invested in order to convert their equipment over to natural gas. They were on oil or they were on propane, so they had to change over their equipment and renew that one. So overall, we're asking the question, why would anybody invest into this technology, which we all agree of is vital to get rid of? We know in 20 to 30 years, this is obsolete. And given the fact that we have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050, and the equipment has a 20-year lifespan, that means the very last moment where we can actually put in a fossil fuel burner is 2030. In order from probably comes the utilities refinance those investments with a 65-year bond. Who's going to pay that money off when in 30 years we won't have ratepayers paying into the gas anymore? In other words, it's one of the largest stranded assets in the history of New York State. And that is something to be absolutely taken serious, because that is the reason why the public policy has shifted in avoiding expansion of the gas distribution network, because the ratepayer in the state will be on the hook for that because of the long write-off times. So at the end of the day, we need to electrify this entire heating sector, and New York State has made a commitment to that. And it's the same as the electrification of the transportation sector. It really is the only medium are currently the only choice to achieve our goals in that way. We have no other means. Just as a little token here, the $27,000 total conversion cost for the people in Plattsburgh, if you ask yourself, what is it to connect somebody from the main in the street, when the gas is in the street, out into in Westchester County to a home there? The average length is about 49 feet. And guess what you're paying for that? The average cost is $25,000. So just because they connect you for free, that doesn't mean it's not free. Who's paying for that? Everybody who is on this call who lives in the Cornell territory. So if you now add it all up, the potential to shave the peak of the heat pumps, which is valued between $13,000 and $15,000, the better utilization of the grid, that means that it will lower actually the cost because we use more electricity, and the grid infrastructure gets better utilized, which is valued between $12,000 and $13,000, depending on in what territory you're in over the next 20 years. In Con Ed, it's about $16,000. Plus the avoidance on the gas infrastructure. And if we only take connecting the line in the street to a household or to the home, we're talking about roughly $50,000 there for over the next 20 years. So everybody was scratching their head once we presented those numbers and said, so why are we still doing this? And this is exactly what will drive partially the transition to that, because people start to realize we're putting a huge amount of money in there every single year, and we still don't have a fossil fuel heating system. Geo can be cheaper, and Geo can be actually much more efficient to operate. And believe it or not, on larger systems in the Westchester territory right now, we start to see bids going in where geothermal is the same cost as it is to the developer to connect, and it is actually cheaper to operate. So it's similar cost for them and cheaper to operate. Why don't we do it? And we start to get the same questions from them now. It's an education issue, but it's also that people are forced to educate themselves. So, as we certainly are with everybody here. We want to improve the building. The best system is the one you don't have to use at all, and it's relatively simple. You get a pretty efficient envelope. You install a Geo system, and you supplement the electrical consumption with wind or solar. We're building about half of our new builds in the Buffalo area, fulfilling net zero standard already. One other graph I wanted to share quickly with you, it is really the domestic hot water, which is also an energy hawk. It's not just the heating. And if you look at the lifetime costs avoided, if you look at that the heat pump lasts for 25 years and an electric vehicle here down here lasts 10 years, the amount of carbon dioxide we can avoid with a Geo heat pump versus an air source heat pump due to its lesser lifespan and also electric vehicles is enormous. We're looking at every geosystem shaves off as much as an electric vehicle. Actually, it's about 2.5 times, 5 times as much. So in other ways, we have to really start thinking that we monetize the enormous benefits. And the state has really thought about this as well and agrees to that, that we are bringing benefits to every ratepayer in New York State. And this is really what they're watching over admirably. And they regulate the utilities. And this is where all this essentially measures are coming from, that they realize that geo is the most affordable and most efficient and most long-lasting technology we have. And it literally pays for itself if you look what cost avoidances we have on both the gas and the electrical grid. Plus, as a side effect, it's emission-free.
Jens, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think we're going to have to really wrap this up.
Yep. And this is really what I want to share. I think we need some policy assurance. We made this clear to everybody. We need to wrap up from 2,000 geosystems to 126,000. That's NYSERDA's number, to achieve even the 40% reduction goal and some political will. And with that, I will end.
Okay, thank you so much. That was great. I just don't want to run out of time.
I hear you. Absolutely. Yeah.
So Jessica Azulay, who is the Executive Director of Alliance for a Green Economy and our co-convener for the Renewable Heat Now campaign, is next to talk about what you can do to take action and accelerate the adoption of energy efficiency and heat pumps. Jessica, the floor is yours.
Okay, give me 1 second. Hi, everyone. I'm going to share my screen here if I can get there. Okay, I believe I am sharing now, yes?
Nope, yes.
Yes.
Okay, let me get myself in presentation mode. Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me on here and for everyone who's joining. Bring it up the rear, and I'm going to try to breeze through this so we have time for questions. So just very quickly, tonight I'm the Executive Director of Alliance for a Green Economy, but I'm mostly speaking on behalf of Renewable Heat Now tonight. And this is a campaign that I'll be talking a little bit about as part of this slideshow. And we've been very active in the energy efficiency proceeding. So as folks mentioned, we have this climate goal of, it used to be 80% greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, but now it's 85% greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. So little change there, and it's still 40% greenhouse gas reductions by 2030. And just to put all of this in perspective and a little focus on where all of our energy comes from in New York. This is a chart from the Energy Information Administration. And as you can see, this is New York energy consumption from all sources. This is not just for electricity, it's also for heating and transportation. And as you can see, Bob kind of touched on this, most of our energy in New York comes from quote unquote natural gas or fracked gas. It's the biggest source of energy, and over 2/3 of that is used for on-site combustion, most of it for heating. So, you know, when we think about tackling and our energy system and transforming our energy system off of fossil fuels and nuclear to 100% renewable electricity, we can see where our biggest challenge is in all of that natural gas that we used. And our second biggest challenge is in all the motor gasoline that we use for transportation. And then this tracks to where our greenhouse gases come from. So this is from NYSERDA's New York State Greenhouse Gas Inventory, the most recent one. And I know this is kind of a complicated slide. We'll share these slides so you can kind of look at them later. But the thing to focus on is this pie chart. And it shows that, you know, the biggest chunk of the pie for greenhouse gas emissions is transportation, but followed really closely by on-site combustion. So that's burning fossil fuels in buildings. And you can see that smaller red sort of maroon slice, which is the electricity generation just by comparison. And a quick note that this chart does not really include Bob's research on the leakage rates of methane or the global warming potential of methane and that shorter impact. So if that stuff were taken into account, we would see that 31% purple slice of the greenhouse gas emissions from on-site combustion, mostly from heating, space heating and hot water, would be a lot bigger. So when we're thinking about meeting our climate goals and getting ourselves to 100% renewables in all sectors, we have to really, really think about how we're getting off of gas. So what is the strategy for getting to 100% renewables in all sectors? So I like to talk about this now that we have a big climate law that really tackles all sectors, trying to get us to greenhouse gas emissions reductions in all sectors. There's a lot of noise out there about how we get there, but where people really tend to agree is on some basic strategies. So one of the key pieces is energy efficiency and conservation, just reducing overall the amount of energy that we use. And then, and this is not all in order, we have to do all of this at the same time. We need to do a strategy commonly known as electrifying everything, or strategic electrification, or environmentally beneficial electrification. And this is how we get off of all those fossil fuels that we combust in our buildings for heating and hot water, is to move them to efficient electric systems, and then power the electricity that's used for them with renewable energy. So that's where heat pumps come in this equation, is, stop delivering fossil fuels to our buildings and get the energy for heating from heat pumps. And then again, providing all of that electricity for the heat pumps and for our light bulbs and refrigerators and everything else, and our cars, from 100% renewable electricity. And then a kind of a complementary strategy is by doing things to balance the system. Because renewable energy is variable, we know the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow, but there is a lot of emerging thought on how to handle that, through storage, through demand response, basically changing when we use energy to respond to the variations in renewable energy supply, and smart grids and smart meters. So this is sort of the basic underpinnings of our work in New York to get ourselves to 100% renewable energy. And energy efficiency and heat pumps play a huge role in this. And so folks have talked a lot about heat pumps. I don't know if anyone gave a basic definition for those who are on the call who don't know what heat pumps do and what they are. But basically there's two kinds. There's air source heat pumps. In the Northeast, we should be using cold climate air source heat pumps. And then there's ground source heat pumps, often known as geothermal. Heat pumps use free energy that's found in the ground or in the air to basically move heat around, and they can heat our homes and heat water very efficiently using relatively small amounts of electricity. And they can also be put in reverse to provide cooling as well. And the cool thing about these is that they get a huge amount of the energy from the ground, especially geothermal systems, which are the most efficient, and from the air. And then they use a relatively small amount of electricity to run the pump. And as Yen said, they utilize the grid really well because in the summer when you're using them for cooling, they're very efficient and they reduce our air conditioning electricity needs. And in the winter, when we don't use as much energy or electricity, when folks are using heat pumps, they're utilizing the grid better. So our Renewable Heat Now campaign is really focused on getting New York to do widespread adoption of heat pumps as, you know, part of an overall fundamental strategy to get ourselves off of fossil fuels and get to 100% renewable energy. And the campaign works to reduce fossil fuels used for heating and cooling. That's our main focus. And we're educating people about heat pumps, trying to accelerate heat pump adoption, and we're advocating for policies that will enable all New Yorkers to be able to afford to make the switch to heat pumps. And just, this is a quick list of the organizations that are currently part of the campaign. We've been growing. And our goal, is to really meet our greenhouse gas reduction goals in the heating sector through heat pumps. And we've had some analysts do some research around, what would that take? And by the way, this number keeps growing every year because we keep missing the goal. But we need over 200,000 homes to be converted to efficient heat pumps every year. I think it's getting up toward 260,000 now, just to meet the 40% greenhouse gas reduction goal. So this is a huge undertaking. We're trying to transform, the heating sector, and we need kind of, all policies and all strategies to get ourselves off of fossil fuels for heating and onto heat pumps. So our platform is to improve the rebates and incentives to get ourselves to that widespread adoption of heat pumps. We want additional incentives and strategies for low-income households so that the transition is equitable. We think that for new buildings, we just shouldn't be putting in fossil fuel heating systems at all. And so we're calling for building codes that eliminate fossil fuel heating in new construction starting in 2021. We also are trying to end New York's gas expansion policy, which is taking us in the wrong direction. It currently incentivizes utilities and customers to convert households from fuel oil to gas instead of leapfrogging over fuel oil straight to heat pumps. And all of that is happening on the backs of ratepayer dollars. And so we've been focused on trying to, while we're incentivizing heat pumps, to also stop the incentives for going in the wrong direction, and then making sure that we're accounting for the greenhouse gases associated with gas, the impacts, through an accurate greenhouse gas inventory based on the most up-to-date science on life cycle emissions from all sources. So our main concerns in the energy efficiency proceeding very much track with what Valerie talked about earlier. We are concerned that the utilities are proposing targets and budgets that are below the 5 TBTU heat pump targets that the Public Service Commission put into its order in December. And we want to make sure the utilities are directed in this next order, again, to comply with that 5 TBTU heat pump target, and that they're required to pursue all cost-effective energy efficiency. There's also going to be a change in the heat pump incentives. So right now, there are incentives available for households and businesses that want to switch to heat pumps. And most of those incentives are through NYSERDA. And that's proposed to change with the utilities taking over all of the heat pump incentives. And NYSERDA may be doing some low-income heat pump programs, but the bulk of the heat pump incentives would be run by the utilities, which could make a lot more money available and could simplify, because now there's some utilities that run heat pump incentives, and so you sometimes have to apply for both the NYSERDA incentive and the utility incentive. But we're worried about this transition. We want to make sure this transition is smooth, that there's enough time for customers to get educated about the incentives that are available. We want to make sure that the incentive levels go up and not down, and that the transition is orderly. And we're also very concerned about all customers getting access to the incentives, because right now the utility incentives that are available, many of them only apply if you can only get them, you're only eligible for them if you're not on a utility gas system. So if you're using fuel oil or kerosene, some of the utilities will make heat pump incentives available to you to switch over to a geothermal or air source heat pump. But if you're on the gas system, they don't want to give you an incentive to switch over to a heat pump. And we can understand why they don't want to, but we think it's really important for gas customers to be able to make the switch to heat pumps. So we're calling for all types of customers to be able to access the new utility incentives. Again, as part of an efficiency proceeding, the ongoing conversion of to gas from fuel oil is a conversion to an inefficient heating source. Gas is still an inefficient heating source as compared to a heat pump, and so we think utilities should basically stop investing our ratepayer money in inefficient on-site combustion, stop expanding their gas infrastructure to make that possible, and to put the investment instead in getting us to heat pumps. We also know that even with incentives, and even if there are good payback periods for heat pumps with better incentives, upfront costs are still going to be a big barrier. And so we need to see utility investments in shared systems, such as, investments into the shared ground loops. And we need inclusive financing mechanisms to get rid of that upfront cost, to make sure that customers aren't taking on debt that they can't pay back or can't access finance. So we're going to need other things other than incentives to really help get us to that over 200,000 heat pumps per year that we need to be getting to meet our climate goals. So how can you take action as part of this energy efficiency proceeding? It's really important. We've celebrated tonight some of the progress that's been made in terms of our new climate law that was passed by the legislature, and in terms of this energy efficiency proceeding, which is finally going to be moving the needle on ramping up energy efficiency. It's really important to note that this progress didn't come from nowhere. It's a result of sustained organizing of public pressure, and the participation of organizations, all kinds of organizations, in the Public Service Commission's proceedings and really pushing them. And so we need you to participate. We need you to help us raise our voices. We need you to give weight to the comments that we're putting in, and build the public pressure necessary to get us to our goals. So one way that you can do this is by submitting a postcard comment in the energy efficiency proceeding with Renewable Heat Now. And I have put a link into the PowerPoint, actionnetwork.org/letters/renewable heat now for all. This is a place where you can go and submit a comment online.
We'll also send a link to everyone tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you, Betta. Yeah, I know you can't click on this PowerPoint presentation. So when Betta does the follow-up, she'll be sending out this link. And we hope that you'll circulate this to folks, that you'll submit a comment yourself. There's that July 1st deadline, so we're in the final week of trying to get comments. And these comments really do make a difference. So we're just asking everybody to submit a comment. If you are a member of an organization, we have a sign-on letter for organizations that covers our key points in the efficiency proceeding around the policies for heat pumps. And so you can contact Betta or you can contact me. We will share a copy of that letter. We are asking organizations to sign on. That letter is also, we have to submit it Monday. So as soon as possible, if you can get your organization signed on to that letter. And then we have a postcard that Beto was just holding up. It's a beautiful postcard. It summarizes in brief bullet points our comments on the efficiency proceeding. We have many of them. If you want to share postcards with get your friends and your members to sign on to these postcards, we will send them to you. So again, you can contact Beto or contact me, and we will get you postcards that can be sent to the Public Service Commission. And then we're also going to be organizing people to show up at the Public Service Commission when they do their next order in the energy efficiency proceeding. And we think this is really important for people. The Renewable Heat Now campaign and our allies, we have shown up in Albany several times now, both around the energy efficiency proceeding, but also around utility gas expansion and just our platform for Renewable Heat Now. And we think it's really important for people to show up and show that they really care about these issues, because there's a lot going on right now. There's a lot of policies in the mix, and they do pay attention when people show up. The Public Service Commission is a board that is appointed by the governor. They regulate the utilities. They make they have a huge impact on what happens with our energy system and whether or not we're going to be able to transition to renewable energy and reduce our climate emissions. And so we are hoping that you will join us to hold this agency accountable for implementing the climate goals. We don't have a date yet because we don't know exactly when the commission is going to issue its next order and respond to all these public comments, but as Valerie said, we think it's early fall. It could be as early as August, but that's seeming more and more unlikely. So probably September. Join our Renewable Heat Now list or stay in touch with New Yorkers for Clean Power, and we will let you know as soon as we have a date for that call to action. So with that, I will end. Thank you so much for joining this webinar, online teach-in, and we are here for your questions.
Great, thanks, Jessica. And as some of you may have gathered, we are running a little behind schedule. It's already 8:32, and we were supposed to end at 8:30, but our generous panelists have agreed to stay on until 8:45, so another extra 15 minutes, so we can at least answer some of your questions. Some of you have multiple questions, so I think we'll just try to take like one question per person. So, Michaela, do you want to start with a question?
Okay. This one.
Whatever you think. Got a lot of good questions.
Yeah. I'm just going to do this one. This one is just directed to Bob. I'm concerned that we don't have a unified message on the GWP of methane, and that lack of clarity will leave New York State using that 25 multiplier. I'm okay with a push for an 86 multiplier, but I think all the experts in New York State and others need to come to a consensus.
That's a great question. Let me back up just a little bit. The new act specifies two things. It specifies that methane will be considered relative to carbon dioxide on a 20-year time period. So that means right off the bat, the 25 global warming factor is out the window. The other thing which the act does, and I think this is critically important, people perhaps don't realize how important, it says that we'll deal with methane on a full life cycle assessment no matter where the methane emissions occur. So when we in New York use shale gas from the fracking fields in Pennsylvania, most of the emissions, 95% of them are probably Pennsylvania. Traditionally, New York said, oh, it's Pennsylvania's problem. But the act specifies that no, we will take responsibility for those in our accounting. So moving forward, we're going to look at total life cycle emissions, no matter where they occur. Most of them are in Pennsylvania. And we're going to use the 20-year time period, no doubt about that. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change from 2013 says we should use an 86 multiplier for that. That science might get updated, it might go up to 100, it might change a little bit, but it's going to be far, far higher than 25. I think the only really remaining issue for science discussion is what that methane emission level is. But the numbers I presented tonight hover around a 4% emission level, and I'm pretty confident that that's where the best science is going to lead us. In the state, we need to set up a process for determining what that best science is. But I'm quite optimistic. This is really groundbreaking in terms of how we account for methane.
Thanks, Bob. Question, I believe, for Valerie, or does anyone have an opinion about establishing a renewable portfolio standard type mechanism for thermal energy, a renewable thermal standard, so to speak? RPS policy has been the fundamental driver for solar and wind in the US. Valerie, I don't know if you want to take that one.
I don't know. I feel as though we could leverage the new climate legislation and our efficiency work to try to drive that. I often feel like we have too many piecemeal little standards, and we really just need to focus on climate and doing everything we need to address that. So, we have renewable portfolio standard that left behind facilities that were older or had expiring RPS contracts, so we had to have a new piece of legislation called the Tier 2 legislation for those. And every time we do something for one technology, then we feel like, wait a minute, what about the other? When really we should be having a more comprehensive climate approach that does all of the above for emission-free resources. That's my opinion. Others may feel differently.
I don't know if anyone else wants to weigh in, or we'll go to another question.
This is Jessica. I guess I won't weigh in on the idea of the thermal standard, but I will say that a lot of our standards have been around electricity and not necessarily around heating or transportation. And so I think we need, and I think we're starting to get there, right? This new efficiency proceeding, acknowledging beyond just an electricity goal and really getting into an all fuels goal is, a good step in that direction. And I'm hopeful that the climate legislation will help this as well. But I think we just need, we need to be thinking really holistically around where our energy in the state is really coming from and where our greenhouse gases are really coming from. And we need to focus there and get, we've barely shown the spotlight on the energy for heating and for transportation. And so regardless of what the standard is or anything like that, I think really just getting ourselves focused where the problem is really important.
Can I just add that one of the issues that's comes up repeatedly is how you pay for transition. And Jessica's right, it's been really focused on the electric sector. And so what you find people who are otherwise friendly to the goals complain about it, or that the costs keep going on the electric system. And a charge for this, a charge for that, including transportation and EV charging stations. And if we need to address the entire economy, we can't pay for it all by volumetric surcharges, or even adjustments to how the utilities earn their money, as was discussed here on getting incentivized to do better in terms of system efficiency. It can't all be on the electric sector because it's economy-wide. So we also have to figure out other mechanisms for paying for the transition.
And I think this one, Jens could take a crack at. Most of the conversation has been about residential. What is the potential for commercial and industrial users? Is there a size limit to where heat pumps can apply, geothermal heat pumps?
There is obviously the size limit is to a certain degree the space available for the ground source heat exchanger. That means the boreholes where we exchange the energy with the ground. Is significantly more challenging in areas like New York City. Obviously, I'll give you an example. In terms of size-wise, there is really almost no limit otherwise. The largest Geo system in the US is Ball State University, and the entire campus is on Geo. And you look at things like St. Patrick's Cathedral is on Geo now, and other examples which are out there. Right now, we're specializing in putting geo loop fields directly under the footprint of the building. NYSERDA just brought up a case study of one of our systems. We're building one in Loopholes right now, where the entire loop field is underneath the building, and we would have enough space for a 25-story tower there. So it's really, the technology is emerging, and I would have no problems anymore. If you now throw certainly the New World Trade Center at me, I would probably say I have to get back to you on that one. But other than that, for the vast majority of the existing buildings, there are now technologies around there that we're creative, and we drill in the sidewalks, we can drill in other areas, we can increase the drilling depth. NYSERDA is helping to work on that to allow us to go deeper in New York State, et cetera, et cetera. So we're tearing down the barriers, the technology is emerging. And the systems where people say, well, it's impossible there, they're more and more becoming rare.
May I ask a follow-up question on that? This is
Sure.
Bob. I agree totally with your assessment, and certainly in a place like New York City, Manhattan, there's a challenge in exchanging the heat from groundwater. Are people thinking about exchanging with the Hudson River or the East River? Incredible resource there that's moves on a time frame of just a day or so. We could extract incredible heat from those rivers.
Yeah, the problem there becomes in terms of those rivers go down to about 32 degrees in the middle of the winter, e.g. there's ice freezing on top of it. And below that ice, it's not a stratified pool or pond where it's 39 degrees on the bottom, but the water is literally 32 degrees. If we now start to extract one more degree out of it, it will become essentially ice and freeze. The heat exchanger will freeze. Mm-hmm. So it is really not possible to have rivers used for geothermal energy in that fashion.
Thanks, Jens. Can you comment on some of the emerging criticisms of the refrigerants used in heat pumps? Maybe compare heat pumps and other electric heat. Are there any advances in baseboard or other electric heat?
This is Jens again. Baseboard and electric heat, the efficiency is 100% of the electricity going in there relatively. Pretty much everything is converted to heat that way. But really that is not efficient if that electricity is not done in a renewable way. If you now, what was the second question? The second portion of the question?
Just advances in like other electric heat. She said mentioned baseboard, but
yeah, there's electric heat is electric heat. There's really nothing but heat pumps which can improve that efficiency. But the first portion of the question.
Refrigerant.
The refrigerant.
Commenting on.
Oh, yes. The point is, I mean, even also we have some much more ozone-friendly refrigerants now, and then although that also has a greenhouse gas emission factor, if that indeed happens to leak into the atmosphere, we cannot deny that. The same as your refrigerator has, and the same as your air conditioner in your car has, and the same amount in the air.
Oh, we're losing you.
Air conditioning. given that we had the refrigerant in the regular air conditioners, there's really no difference between a conventional air conditioner and a heat pump. They use pretty much the same refrigerant. And then the second portion here is to answer, we're getting a lot more better greenhouse gas friendlier refrigerants which are phased in and developed. So the technology is getting better in that regard as well.
Thanks, Jens. And for those of you who are able to attend on September 21st at SUNY New Paltz, we're having a Climate Solutions Summit. We'll be diving deeper into many of these issues, and we'll also have a workshop explicitly on refrigerants, because it is a really important issue when it comes to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So I think we'll do one or two more questions, and then we can share all of the questions with the panelists and see if they can answer them online. And then when we do the follow-up email, either tomorrow or the next day, we can then try to reply to some other people's questions, because we ran out of time. There's so much good stuff to talk about. Michaela, do you want to?
Yeah. Some of us want to work on legislation to halt fossil fuel infrastructure, recognizing the limits of interstate gas pipelines. What are the links like prohibiting utilities from expanding gas hookups that we should include in order to support clean, renewable heat?
I think I could probably take this one if I understand it correctly. So I think, I think Jens touched on this as well. So, currently most of the utilities in New York are continuing to switch people and really push and market people switching from fuel oil to gas. And they like this because it helps them, expand their gas infrastructure, and then they get to make profits off of expanding their infrastructure. And they say it's good for economic development and it's cleaner, although we know that gas isn't cleaner. And we also know that there's going to be, this moment when we're going to have all these stranded assets, and that is not going to be good for the economy or for ratepayers. So if we're serious about meeting our climate goals, we not only have to stop expanding the gas infrastructure, we're going to have to start pulling the gas infrastructure out. And we're going to need to switch pretty much everyone off of fossil fuels for heating. And currently it's 90% of households in New York heat with fossil fuels. So this is a big challenge. And I think, that we really need to push on our regulators, and it would be awesome to have law that supports this to stop stop expanding the gas infrastructure, stop hooking people up to the gas system, stop adding new customers, and starting to manage a decommissioning process around our gas system. We know we're going to have to eliminate pretty much all of it.
Yeah,
so any legislation that helps us do that would be great. I know there's a lot of ideas about, what could change in the law to enable that, but I think it would be great.
Yeah, this is Jens. I just want to add to that. One of the things, keep in mind that the moratorium in Westchester, for example, is a direct result of the state saying no to an expansion on the pipeline level of the gas infrastructure. And the Public Service Commission went some very unusual steps by saying you can rate base an investment if it's renewable. That means if you find a non-pipeline alternative, we're all with you. And keep in mind that the Public Service Commission wrote a $65 million order to Ken Edison to replace existing gas customers with 9,900 or 9,800 Geo Systems, because it is cheaper than building the new pipeline. And that was one of the first steps there to say, we're going to go, instead of building new pipelines, we're going to put renewable energy systems in there, and we can actually rate base it, and it's more cost efficient. The new pipeline would have cost $110 million, but they can have the same effect by putting 8,800 Geo Systems in.
Great.
For significantly lesser dollars. So what you're asking is that's actually already happening. And the last time there was a gas main system expanded was in Plattsburgh, New York. And then there's obviously the famous Tompkins County, which they were approved the gas pipeline, but then also the county itself said no, not through our territory, which kind of stopped the whole project, which was kind of a great heroic act. After that, there's no other expansion project I'm aware of.
Jens, I will just note that Con Edison has been talking about getting more gas from other pipelines by investing in and signing agreements around compressor stations to pump more gas into their system. And Con Ed is also, through discovery in their rate case, we found that they're planning to add thousands more gas customers to their system. So it's a mixed, there's definitely progress happening in Westchester. And we've been seeing the Public Service Commission start to turn the corner, but we're still seeing a lot of mixed messages around continuing to add fossil fuels, add customers to the gas system. So having kind of some declarative legislation around this would certainly not hurt.
I would also add, just in terms of the money that's being spent, the commission also needs to be continually pushed to not force utilities to trade off the money that they spend in one area for another. So for example, Con Edison had a proceeding on non-pipes solutions for Con Edison so that they have alternatives to gas infrastructure. And they were approved to do a number of initiatives. And then they were told, oh, but that $200 million we're approving for that should come out of your efficiency budget. We're not giving you more money for the non-pipe solutions. And that is something that we're also not happy with. Some of it was because they claimed they had unspent money that they should use, but going forward, you shouldn't pit one against the other. We need both, and we need both to be well funded.
Okay, yes, agreed. Should be a minimal amount of spending. We need both streams. And as Valerie, you pointed out in your initial presentation, utilities should be pursuing all cost-effective energy efficiency measures, which includes heat pumps. So bringing it back to our public comments, we're going to circulate that link tomorrow, and it's a great platform where you can copy and paste our suggested language, but you can also put your own thoughts in there, something you maybe learned tonight that you want to include, or just something else that you think the Public Service Commission should know in relation to energy efficiency and heat pumps and getting off fossil fuels. So we have still tons more questions, but unfortunately it's almost 9 o'clock. So I think we need to let everybody go. But as I said, we'll circulate the questions to panelists, see what we can get answered, and follow up with folks. Really appreciate everybody's time, both our experts and our attendees. We're all in this together if we're going to reach those goals and turn things around. So I'm grateful that we have such a fantastic community of advocates, and let's just keep working. In the meantime, have a great evening, some good rest, and I hope to see you all soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Betta.
Thank you.
Thank you, Betta.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.